Welcome to Baroque Notes, our series of virtual pre-concert lectures. I'm thrilled to have with me today our principal guest conductor, Nicholas Kramer, who will be leading our performances of Messiah on November 28th and 29th, our first performances of this work in over a decade. Nicholas, welcome. I am so happy to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
For me, Messiah is one of those works that's played over and over again. For me, though, it's something I never get tired of Messiah. I think it's just brilliant. How many times do you think you've conducted it?
Well, well over 100. And, and counting, because, there's no shortage of them this year. A week after I've done the Thanksgiving Messiahs, I'm back in London doing one in Cadogan Hall. So, and then they're fixed for next December as well. So, it doesn't stop, and I never get tired of it. I think it's because there's always something new to find in it. I mean, maybe not always musically, although it has developed over the years in my mind. But I think this sort of has a universal appeal as well, because actually, it's called Messiah, not the Messiah. It's called Messiah.
Oh.
And this could, this just means the anointed one. Right. This doesn't need to be Christian. It doesn't even need to be Jewish. It could be it could apply to anything, anybody.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before. I know that during the pandemic, you've been doing a lot of writing and thinking about this piece in particular. What do you think drew you to Messiah at this moment in time?
I suppose over the pandemic, I had some time, and I decided to put my thoughts, which were derived really my discovery about the text from a wonderful little book called The Gospel According to Messiah by a priest called Roger Bullard. And it's quite an old book. I mean, this is 20 or 30 years old, and it's been out there. And I hadn't seen it until about 15 years ago. And I just couldn't believe what I read, because I bet a whole lot of other listeners would have thought that the whole text of Messiah is about the coming of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And of course, that is how it's been engineered and managed. But the origin of it all, and we'll go into this a lot deeper in a moment, is actually from an age 700, 500 years before Christ was born. So it couldn't do. And I think the ambiguity of the text, which there's no other word for it, has inspired Handel to write the most extraordinary music.
So I'm really interested in what you said actually about the idea that there's, the text of Messiah, and then the idea that over the centuries as it's been performed, that it's sort of been managed. So you think in a way that the way we think about Messiah now is actually maybe different from the way people might have thought about Messiah when they first heard it in the 1740s.
Yes, and I think possibly the audiences then knew more about the Bible than listeners do nowadays. If they did, they would have recognized a lot of Old Testament stuff that came up, and they will know that this is, not actually referring directly to Jesus Christ.
So as someone preparing to conduct Messiah, how do you get ready for this? What's the preparation process like? Are you just immersed in the scores? Are you analyzing texts? How do you form your interpretation of the work?
It's what I call nuts and bolts. So it's really quite tedious and quite boring. What I'm doing is bowing and marking the parts, the string parts. I'm annotating a vocal score for the chorus director, and I say this because recently my set of Messiah got lost, and I had to order a new one. So I've spent the last 2 or 3 months marking a new set, as it happens, the old set turned up just after I'd finished it. So I now have two sets. But
did you compare them, actually, the old set versus the new set?
Well, it's quite interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me that, in fact, I made some new decisions about, tiny things about phrasing that I'd reconsidered. And so they're in the new set.
Has the way conductors approached Messiah changed over the years?
Oh, my goodness, yes. And even within my, since I started performing it, I've changed. And I've changed with, I suppose, with the musicians that I'm surrounded by. Fashions have changed. As soon as the early instrument movement began in the 70s, 1970s, that is, it completely changed the way we perform Messiah and hear it. That has continued through the ages, through the years, and affected the modern instrument performances, of which you will hear in November, because we in Music of the Baroque play what's called modern instruments.
So I know that you've got an example of the overture that you found that is maybe an example of what people don't do today.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know anybody and any country that would perform the overture in the way that Karl Richter did in the 1960s.
Great. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
If you look at the score of the overture, it all looks very much like exactly how Karl Richter performs it, because he's not wrong. It's all very sustained. There are no rests except in the bass line in the first bar where they stop playing. There's the other thing about the dots. You'll see that there's a single dot next to the first note, and then the next note has a little tail on it, which means it's half its value. And so that means it goes da dee da dee dee da da dee. But we know that that isn't how they performed these so-called French overtures, which is what this is. We employ something, and this isn't absolutely universal. It's quite controversial. We employ something called double dots. So you can go dum, da dum, da dee, da dee.
And now let's listen to a little bit of the performance, a recent performance that you did during the pandemic, actually, with English Chamber Orchestra and Voces 8. And let's hear how you approach the beginning of the overture.
it's hard to believe that it's the same piece. I think you will agree.
So was it in the 19th century that Messiah became a work that was adopted by amateur choral societies and performed quite a bit?
Amateur choral societies were invented to perform choral works with anybody who wanted to sing. And it's still, to this day, they exist. And for some reason or other, Messiah has become the staple diet of these amateur choral societies.
I grew up in a family where we didn't hear Messiah a lot. And I think, honestly, that I was a teenager the first time I heard it. And of course, I knew about sing-along Messiahs. And I finally performed it with a choir when I was in my 20s. And I was shocked how hard it is. It's really hard to sing.
Yes. I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it?
What do you think the most difficult chorus is in Messiah?
Technically, I think His Yoke is Easy, the last chorus of part one, because, and I think people make a mistake with it. They try to do it too fast, and it's got such wonderful internal rhythms that just go for nothing if it's done too fast. And I hope that when you hear my performance in at the end of November, that you'll agree that it just has to bounce along in a slightly sort of a bouncy way, so that we can hear this wonderful detail.
Of the 100 or so performances you've conducted of Messiah, what are some of the most memorable?
One of the most memorable was performed in Dublin, where the Messiah was premiered. Mm-hmm. And it was premiered in the music hall in Fishamble Street. My performance was 20 yards from that Fishamble Street music hall, which doesn't exist anymore, in Christ Church Cathedral. And funnily enough, I was staying in a hotel where the music hall stood. So the music hall in Fishamble Street is now a hotel. I mean, the site of it, of course, not the actual music hall. What could be more sort of, I don't know, humbling than to do a performance of Messiah in that place? But you know, it was just that was very memorable, though, I have to say. Yeah. And it was one of the only performances I've done with period instruments as well, which was very interesting. Another one was very, very different to that, which was in Wales. And it was for an Eisteddfod, which is the annual, or maybe it's not annual, but biannual, I think, festival of music in the Welsh language. And that's exactly what I had to do. I had to do Messiah in Welsh. So my score is now annotated with all the Welsh phonetics. So taken by the enthusiasm and the absolute sort of avid energy that came from this huge crowd.
It speaks in a way actually to what you said right at the beginning about its universal, in some ways, an actual universal message and sort of universal appeal.
And then more recently, I've done two wonderful performances in Minnesota with the Minnesota Chorale and the Minneapolis with the Minnesota Orchestra in Minneapolis. They're just a wonderful group and wonderfully coached.
What are you looking forward to in particular about your upcoming performances of Messiah with Music of the Baroque?
What I'm looking forward to with Music of the Baroque is the fact that I'm working with an orchestra that I know extremely well, and a choir, a chorus that I know well too, who are professional, because generally I'm working with an amateur choir who, you know, you make concessions for amateur choirs, however well they're trained. I've now done it so many times that to be able to do it, I mean, of course it's going to be different from the last time in certain ways, because the people are different, and you know, we all had something different for breakfast, you know, that sort of thing. It does affect. I'm never going to do something exactly the same tempo, for instance. The overture might sound different from the way I did it last, but that's what is wonderful about live music.
Well, I think it's really fitting, and I think you've said this actually elsewhere. It's really fitting that this is the Music of the Baroque Chorus's first regular season appearance since I think Brass and Choral in December 2019. So, you know, I think this is a really fitting piece, you know, with which to come back, and we're really excited also to have you conducted, especially after listening to everything you've had to say about it and your experiences with it. So I can't wait for that.
Me neither.